Next, we have Gossamer Bio Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol GOSS and is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on the development and commercialization of seralutinib for the treatment of pulmonary hypertension. Please welcome its CFO and COO, Bryan Giraudo. Nice to see you, Bryan. Welcome to the conference.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here and very excited to chat with you about Gossamer Bio and our promising therapy for pulmonary arterial hypertension, seralutinib.
Wonderful. The floor is yours. Call me back when you're ready for questions.
You got it. Perfect. Let me tick through here, and I'll try to go about 10 to 12 minutes, and hopefully we can have some questions from the audience. Very quickly, Gossamer Bio is a San Diego-based biotech company founded in 2018 that went public in 2019. We started the world with a portfolio of assets, and just due to the challenges and opportunities of drug development, we have zeroed in on one asset, seralutinib. Seralutinib is currently in a phase 3 multinational registrational study for the treatment of pulmonary arterial hypertension, and expecting next year to be in a phase 3 for an associated disease, pulmonary hypertension associated with interstitial lung disease. I will get into both the markets, the mechanism of action, as well as the data we have generated to date. Seralutinib is creating quite a bit of excitement in the clinical community. And obviously, as one can see with our stock price and valuation, that excitement has not yet translated into the financial community, but we think that as we get closer to data, that will certainly be the case. Let's talk a little bit about what seralutinib is and the market we're going into, and we'll talk about the disease. Seralutinib is what's known as a kinase inhibitor that's currently focused on 3 different kinases that we believe are the underlying part of the root cause for pulmonary hypertension, a disease that affects between 30 and 50,000 people in the United States and has a terrible long-term survival, a median mortality rate at 5 years, about 57%. This is a disease we would not want any of our family members to get. It disproportionately affects women of childbearing age, and I'll walk through some of the nuances around the disease. In regards to our drug seralutinib, we did complete a successful phase 2 study known as the TORREY study, where we saw a very good reduction in our primary endpoint, pulmonary vascular resistance, a fancy way to take blood pressure of when the arteries are entering the right heart. We saw improvement in right heart function, but importantly, as we looked long-term, we are seeing best-in-class efficacy and best-in-class safety, which, as you can imagine, for a chronic disease like PAH becomes very important. So what is PAH and why is it garnering a significant amount of attention? As you can see here on the right side of the graph, what happens in PAH is that the smooth muscle cells that build the arteries througout your body, but specifically in your lung, don't stop growing. They almost turn themselves into tumors. And in doing so, they end up occluding or closing off, which makes it very hard for the right heart to pull or pump oxygenated blood from the lungs into the left ventricle, then to the rest of the body. So if you have one side of your heart overworking, what ends up happening is those patients go into right heart failure and unfortunately die. To date, most therapies have been focused around treating the symptoms of PAH. That's roughly a $7 billion market. They are known as vasodilators, where they would rapidly open up one's arteries to allow for a temporary leaving of that occlusion, but it does not stop that underlying cellular overgrowth that ends up leading to the right heart failure. Today, there are really there's 4 approved regimens. If you look at the top part of the graph here, most patients start with what are known as endothelial receptor agonists, as well as PD5s, which end up slowing the disease, but not necessarily treating the underlying cause. Certainly has a help with patients' symptoms. And as they become refractory to those therapies, they go on what are known as prostacyclins, which are very efficacious in relieving the symptoms, but carry a very challenging treatment and side effect profile. Recently, we had the first new mechanism approved in PAH, a drug called sotatercept or Winrevair, which is marketed by Merck. It was approved in the United States in March of 2024. It has shown very good efficacy. It targets a very new and novel receptor called the activin ligand trap. They have shown very good efficacy, but the therapy starts to wane about 14 or 15 months after therapy. It works well in about a third of patients, works really well in about a third of patients, which means about 85% of the patient population in PAH aren't the best candidates for sotatercept. Moreover, long-term, sotatercept has shown to have some side effects that really prohibit long-term use. If one were to look at the data that was presented earlier this year, we saw some an uncomfortable level of gastrointestinal hemorrhage as well as intracranial bleed, something that, of course, for long-term and chronic use, you don't want to see. Right behind sotatercept is our therapy. Seralutinib targets, again, really three different mechanisms that are important. PDGFR, which is that anti-proliferative that stops that cellular overgrowth, c-KIT and CSF1R that inhibit the fibrosis and inflammation that we see with the disease. Why is that important? It's important because this drug was specifically designed for a route of administration that's very unique. We deliver via a dry powder inhaler, which allows us to get drug to the site of disease. This drug came out of the University of Albany in New York, where a scientist and now a Gossamer employee, Dr. Larry Zisman, who had been treating patients, an academic cardiologist in upstate New York, said, we need to come up with a better mousetrap. There had been a lot of work with these mechanisms. Specifically, Novartis had used their anti-cancer drug Gleevec or imatinib to see if that would work to stop that cellular overgrowth. That study was done about 15 years ago, and it was quite successful from an efficacy perspective, but had a safety profile that did not allow it to come forward. Larry and his colleagues in the labs came up with a unique, novel, and more potent therapy in seralutinib. And that's really important because if you're able to have more potency with less drug, obviously you can mitigate some of the side effects that we saw not only with Novartis attempts, but what our competitor with sotatercept is showing. I said that it's important that you're able to get drug to the site of where the disease is. We do that with a dry powder inhaler that you can see here on the screen. For some of the folks who are asking, is that an expensive endeavor? Not really. That inhaler costs, under $1. It's approved in a number of other indications, but it is ideal for both the formulation that we have, but also the ability to deposit seralutinib into the deep lung. So we've set the table here with what we think is not only a differentiated, very potent, very safe mechanism, but a route of delivery that allows us to get the therapy right to the site of action. I said we completed a phase 2 study that was successful. We reported this data out in December of 2022, where our primary endpoint, PVR, was a reduction of 14%. We saw, as you get into sicker patients, even greater efficacy. For example, the sicker patients that were in functional class 3, we saw a 21% reduction in PVR, but importantly, the ability for these folks exercise to increase 37 meters, which again is showing that the heart is working more efficiently. This data is something that obviously we're proud about, but it certainly had some controversy. Part of the reason why our valuation is where it is. I mentioned that our friends at Merck had a drug that was approved in an equivalent comparable study. Their efficacy ranged from, if you look at the red box PVR, their efficacy ranged from a reduction of 18% to 32%. So on face value, one would say, goodness, they performed better than what we did with seralutinib. That's not necessarily the case. They did their study in 2019 to early 2020 versus ours, where we conducted our study during the height of COVID. Why is that relevant? we designed, or we executed our study during the height of COVID. We had a much less sick patient population in our phase 2 than what Merck had when they did their phase 2. And so as a result, when you have less sick patients, it just takes the therapy a little bit longer to have a greater efficacy quotient, if you will. That being said, is part of the reason why the physician community is so excited about seralutinib, because when they look at the relative health of the patients that were in our phase 2, they're sitting there saying, goodness, the fact that you guys were statistically significant in this patient population suggests that we have an opportunity to use seralutinib and have a promise of efficacy in a much broader patient population than potentially others. Moreover, if you recall, I said that we have the excitement is also around what we're doing with the right heart. These patients die from right heart failure at 24 weeks. Unprecedented data where we were able to show via echocardiogram that, in fact, what was going on in the right heart for those on seralutinib was that the right heart was actually starting to heal itself, which has never been seen before. And quite frankly, no other biotech company had shown this type of data. So less sick patients, profound impact on right heart, more potent, combined with a very easy route of delivery. The Merck drug is a injection every 3 weeks. For us, we have 6 puffs twice a day. You're starting to see a package here that is suggesting the possibility of market leadership in this $7 billion market. Today, as I said, we are in a registrational, one of the other aspects that got folks very excited, as I said, was our long-term data. In clinical studies in PAH, after your 24-week endpoint, you keep patients that were on drug on for another 48 weeks, so 72 weeks in total. For those that were on placebo, you put them on therapy. I think what was really important, and again, the last piece that got the clinical community very excited, was that for those patients that were originally randomized to drug, you had almost a near doubling of their efficacy at week 72. So this, again, in this less sick patient population, we're seeing that the drug is continuing to improve patients' lives, that we're seeing an improvement in PVR. More importantly, we're seeing an increase in their exercise capacity. They're able to, in the case of this, walk more over time, which again is showing that the right heart is able to pull oxygenated blood easier and distribute it throughout the body in a more efficient and productive way. Again, this is the type of data that has gotten the clinical community very excited. We continue to present this data to the clinical community in medical conferences, including a couple that are coming up this fall. And we are now starting to see significant differentiation between seralutinib, sotatercept, and every other therapy in PAH. I said we are in a multinational registrational study. It's currently up and running, enrolling patients. Enrollment is exactly where we want it to be. This, as you can see, has a entry criteria, and that's the important piece here, that ensures that we get those more sick patients that we weren't able to get in our phase 2. The good news is that the PAH world, unfortunately, is back to normal. We have the more normalized patient population that we hope to get. That certainly previous folks were able to get prior to COVID. And importantly, we have this in about 160 centers, 35 countries around the world. And that excitement that our phase 2 data generated is translating into excitement for physicians to put their patients onto the study. Our expectation is that we will finish enrollment around early Q2 of next year with that phase 3 data in the fourth quarter of 2025. I mentioned a little bit about the next indication that we're going into. It's a disease called pulmonary hypertension associated with interstitial lung disease. It's roughly twice the size of PAH, but with only one therapy approved in the United States, Tyvaso, marketed by United Therapeutics, ticker UTHR. And they've seen phenomenal growth, unfortunately, in this disease, where really when you think about the patient profile for these, not only is it a larger disease, less competition, but these patients are very, very sick, have a mortality rate that is 2 times that of PAH, and with the absence of really any competition for Gossamer, we think could take the peak sales of seralutinib up 3 to 4x from what we could do in PAH alone. We'll have more discussion later this year about what that phase 3 trial looks like. We are just beginning regulatory conversations on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think what's important is that with nothing approved in the European Union or in other parts of the world, there is a very, very nice opportunity for us to grow the seralutinib revenue pie. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about finances. We have earlier this year in May announced a global partnership with the privately held, family-owned, but multinational European pharmaceutical company called Chiesi. They've been around for 85 years, leaders in cardiology and pulmonology, especially in the European Union. They've committed between an upfront as well as cost sharing roughly $600 million in the next couple of years to Gossamer, and will enable us to enter markets like PH-ILD much quicker than we would have been able to do on our own, as well as ensuring, quite frankly, solvency, if you will, when it comes to capital. So the ability for us to not only fund the phase 3 that's currently ongoing, but clinical work in PH-ILD. And quite frankly, I can't think of a better partner for seralutinib, given the fact that they're looking at this being transformational for their business as well. They do about $3.5 billion of sales in the United States. I would say they have probably the best EBITDA margin of any pharma company on God's green earth. And so as a result, the ability for them to not only get seralutinib scripts written, but to get reimbursed in geographies that have been tougher for some of our other pharma colleagues is quite robust. And so we're very excited about that. Finally, just some financial statistics. We did end the second quarter with $350 million of cash on the balance sheet. We do have $200 million of convertible debt outstanding that will be due in May of 2027. So well beyond the data that we'll have in PAH. We have 226 million shares outstanding. So with that, let me pause to see if there's any questions from the audience.
All right, thank you. We do have some questions for you. Jay Von Blankenship asks, are you in development or do you have any products in production and sales?
So we're purely in development. Seralutinib is the only product that we are currently prosecuting, and again, it's in the phase 3 ProSera study, and soon to be a phase 3 in PH-ILD. Our expectation would be data from PAH late 25, begin a approval process with the FDA in 2026 for a launch in either Q4 26 or Q1 27.
And Jet Kelly wants to know what other drugs are currently being used for the same ailments, and talk about the benefits of hitting your goals.
So there are, as I said, let me go back to the slide, forgive me. There are 3 classes of drugs, about 13 drugs that have been approved in PAH, PD5s and ERAs. There are really been 2 companies historically that were PAH leaders. A company called Actelion that was acquired by Johnson & Johnson for $30 billion. They had a series of PD5s and ERAs. And then you had United Therapeutics, who had a series of prostacyclins. So they were kind of on either end of the bookends. Merck is the first new entrant into this marketplace with sotatercept, and we will be the next new entrant. Our drugs will fill that gap between the ERAs and PD5s and where the prostacyclins are. Very different in PH-ILD, where there's only one approved therapy in the form of inhaled Tyvaso, which is a form of these prostacyclins you can see on the right side of the page, and nothing approved outside the United States.
Okay, thank you for that. Jim Harper asks, after the tissue turns to tumors and is treated, what's the reoccurrence rate? Do you have any sufficient data at this point?
So this is a progressive disease. Ultimately, for every patient, the disease wins. And historically, again, why we have this 5-year mortality rate. When it comes to our experience with seralutinib, I can't tell you what the end time point is when the therapy stops working. We have patients out to almost 4 years. When you look at that long-term open label extension data and the continued benefit that we are trying to see, I would say to you, one of the leading key opinion leaders in this space framed it when he compared it to, again, the Merck drug sotatercept. And for the audience's understanding, sotatercept was created by a company called Acceleron that Merck bought for $11 billion. Let's compare that to my modest $200 million market cap with what I think is a much better drug that we have in seralutinib. As they have said, when it comes to our comparison of these two new drugs, seralutinib and sotatercept, with sotatercept, we know the efficacy plateaus roughly around 14, 15 months. The side effect liabilities have not plateaued. They continue to accumulate, which is a problem. It's the inverse with seralutinib. We do not, and we have not seen a plateau in efficacy. Patients continue to get better and have been getting better, as you can see here, through 72 weeks of treatment. We now have some patients out 4 years, a small number, that are maintaining health. We have not seen any more side effects. The largest side effect that we have is cough and headache. Again, compare that to sotatercept, acquired for $11 billion, that has a incidence of intracranial or brain bleeds and gastrointestinal hemorrhage, as well as telangiectasia, which is spider veins, both cosmetically and internally on internal organs. So ultimately, do we expect that the disease will win? In this case, like in other diseases like multiple sclerosis, like rheumatoid arthritis, eventually the disease will win. But the time point for when that happens with patients on seralutinib is not yet known, because we're seeing not only improvement in the right heart, but the measurements that we take, exercise capacity, pulmonary vascular resistance, number of patients continue to improve long term.
And Cameron asks, how many subjects were in your phase 2? What was their profile?
So the profile, we had 80 patients in the phase 2. Majority of those patients were functional class 2 patients. What does that mean? In PAH, you have functional class 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you're a functional class 1, the early half of those functional class 1 patients really don't know they have disease. You start to feel disease. You start to feel the inability, getting up from the couch to go to the refrigerator. You're like, God, I don't feel well. That's when you start to go on those 2 drugs, ERAs and PD5s. The largest swath of the market are functional class 2 and functional class 3 patients. If you're a functional class 4 patient, you are either in hospice waiting for a lung transplant or having something like 6 months to live. So the meat of the market, if you will, are functional class 2 and functional class 3 patients. Most clinical studies have the sicker half of functional class 2 patients and a lot of functional class 3 patients. That is certainly the patient profile that historic PAH studies had done. In the case of our phase 2, and it's a very good question, we had an imbalance towards less sick functional class 2 patients, and even the less sick half of functional class 2 patients. That was purely a function of the patients that were available during COVID. As you can imagine, this is a disease of the lungs and the heart. It was a pandemic of respiratory disease. Patients did not want to leave their homes and come to clinic to start new clinical studies. So again, the fact that we were able to be statistically significant in this very less sick patient population not only gave the clinical community great excitement, but now as they're seeing this long-term efficacy in this less sick patient population, they're seeing a much bigger beachhead for seralutinib than any other therapy that they've been able to work with.
Thank you for that. Nick states you received a grant a few months ago. So how are you currently funded? And how far does your current coffers take you? And correct him if he's wrong, but you have about $1 per share in cash.
With 220 Well, let's say this: we ended the year with $350 million, or the second quarter, $350 million of cash. That part of that was an upfront that we received from Chiesi for the relationship, where they will have rights to market seralutinib outside the United States. We will have a 50-50 profit split in the United States. Our cash takes us well into 2027. I can't really go beyond 2027 because of that convertible liability that I will have to resolve. It has a $16 strike price. Hopefully with good data that can turn into equity, but if not, we will figure out ways to make that liability go away. But for all intents and purposes, for the results that we expect to have next year, we have no need to raise additional capital. And quite frankly, we really don't with our financial partner, Chiesi, because again, we have a 50-50 cost split on all of our activities outside of the ProSera study. So I'd love to say we're perpetually solvent, but importantly, I think with the financial backing of Chiesi, our need to do what every biotech company does after they have positive data, go do a big equity raise. We just don't have the need to do that because one, we're so well capitalized going into the event, but secondly, we have a partner that again would love to continue to sponsor what we're doing with seralutinib.
And Adrian wants to know, have you been in contact with Merck?
Absolutely. This is a field where the intimacy between patient, provider, and company is very, very strong. Just this past weekend, the Pulmonary Hypertension Association, which is the largest advocacy group in the United States, had their conference in Indianapolis, and we are always talking with Merck and other sponsors, ways that we could work together. We actually believe there could be some nice synergy between their compound and ours. And certainly we have a tremendous amount of respect for what they're doing. Certainly, I think folks will also, if you look at the webpage, look at our management team. Our chief commercial officer came from Merck, where he was leading the launch activities for sotatercept. So there's a lot of friendly interactions as we try to collectively solve this terrible disease.
Well, thank you so much, Bryan. Do you have any closing remarks for our viewers today?
I just want to thank everybody for coming in, and obviously we're thrilled with the opportunity to present. I've been in the biotech space for almost 30 years, and I don't think I've ever seen such a gulf, if you will, from the clinical realities and excitement and where the financial community is. And certainly, I think as folks begin to take a look at seralutinib the way the clinical community is, I think we will see an increase in our valuation. And please don't hesitate to reach out. All of our information is on our website. And thank you for the opportunity to present.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll see you again in the future. All right, everyone, stay with us. We'll be back with Nova Minerals.